Hello and welcome to AutoTrader Carology Bitesize, our video series where we host experts in Canadian automotive to discover the latest news and trends in our space, ensuring you are in the know. I'm your host, Sabrina Bond, B2B Marketing Manager at AutoTrader, and today I'm joined by Baris Akyurek, our Vice President of Insights and Intelligence. For our first sit-down of the year, Baris will provide a recap of how the automotive industry fared in 2025 and compare that to what we are seeing so far this year in terms of inventory, pricing, micro and macroeconomic factors, and more. We'll even provide a view of how Baris sees this year shaping up. Thank you so much for joining me today, Baris.
Thanks for the invite, Sabrina.
Okay, let's start off with looking back a bit on 2025. There was a lot going on. Can you give us a brief summary of kind of the key takeaways of the automotive industry?
Yeah, 2025 it started off just fine, and then guess what happened? Tariffs came into place in April, and if you remember 2020, right, back in 6 years ago now, the dynamics were different, but we saw a big impact on car prices. The demand increased, and consumers thought that a similar dynamic would play out because of the tariffs. And actually, we did this research, and that was the outcome of the research as well. So what happened? And consumers again push forward their purchases, and then when that happens, what happens to the prices? Prices started to go up, which is usually not what we see in a normal year. Usually, Sabrina, you and I, we talk about this a lot, right? Prices start on the higher side, they come down throughout the year, but because of the tariffs last year, it started up on the high side again, came down for a couple of months, and then in around March, the demand started to pick up, and it stayed on the higher side until end of July, August, and then the second half of the year was a bit softer. So, but overall, it was a decent year, both for new and used vehicles. So, yeah, another year with lots of dynamics at play.
Yeah, I know that well. I had to buy both a new and a used car last year. So
maybe you should tell us about what's going on, what you saw.
Yeah, I should. Okay, so what are we seeing in terms of those used and new car pricings going into this year now?
Yeah, so look, before I respond to that question, let's talk briefly about what we see around demand. So,
sure.
As I just briefly mentioned, the first half of last year the demand was on the higher side, higher than normal because of the tariffs. So probably on a year-over-year basis, the first half of this year is going to be on the softer side on paper. But again, on the contrary, second half of the year, because the last year was on the softer side, assuming that there's no major changes in the market, which is questionable, probably we'll see a better second half. So a couple of things to think about. Number one is obviously these tariff situations back and forth. So, we'll see what happens with that. So far, Canada, relatively speaking, we are doing well. We are not paying as much as some other countries do, which is good. But on the other hand, the CUSMA review is expected to start in July.
Okay.
That's the agreement between us, United States, and Mexico. So when it's being reviewed, how it's going to turn out, how are those negotiations going to go about given the fluctuations or volatility that we've observed in the last couple of years. So that's a big question mark. But again, when I read and then when I talk to economists and banks and their reports, no one's expecting a recession, right?
Okay.
So probably there's going to be some slowdown, which we have seen in the last while, but no one's expecting a recession. That's good.
Yep.
So assuming no major changes in the market, things should be okay. But again, there's some question marks to think about.
Yeah, we'll have to touch base around then again.
Yeah.
Okay, so based on what you're seeing so far, and more specifically the story coming from those data sources that you mentioned, can you give us a little bit of a sales forecast for this year?
Yeah, so what we are seeing is that we are expecting to see growth for new and used. It's not going to be probably a big growth, if I'm being completely honest, but there's going to be some growth. So last year, new car sales went up by around 2% on a year-over-year basis. So probably it's going to be around between 1% and 2 percentage points, 2% this year as well. On the used side, I'm more optimistic, and let me explain to you why. Whenever something happens, whenever a major change, a major dynamic plays out on the new car side of things, used car gets impacted quite a bit. Again, going back to COVID, going back to tariffs, right? The demand, like there's a little bit of like overlapping demand, if that's the right way of describing it, that moves from new to used. And if these tariffs stay for longer, if there's an issue with the CUSMA review, obviously this might have an impact on new car prices. And if that happens, we expect to see that some of that new car demand to move over to the used side.
Okay.
So I'm a bit more optimistic when it comes to used car sales. But again, we are making some assumptions at this point.
Yeah.
So we should probably speak again in the middle of the year to see where things are. But that's how we look at it right now.
Okay. Now, I know it's almost time for our electric vehicle research that we do with consumers. Can you give us an update of EV sales and consumer perspective there?
Yeah, so that's a good one. We've been doing this survey for since 2022.
Yeah.
So, and one of the key questions that we ask consumers in this survey is that, would you consider buying an EV as your next purchase? And up until this point, it had been coming down. It started off at 68%. Now last year was 42%. But a lot of things change on the EV side as well. So as you probably know, there's mandates are no more, and also incentives are back. So, and we know from, again, looking at the our EV research, we know that consumers who don't want to buy an EV, one of the biggest obstacles is higher purchase cost. So, again, no mandates, incentives are back. That obviously helps with the prices. And I don't want to give away too much. We are just finalizing the survey literally, I think, either today or tomorrow.
Oh, okay, nice.
So it's going to come out in the beginning of April. So I don't want to tell you too much about it. But when we looked at the high-level data, we see some positive impact on demand and sales based on what we see on the leads data on the marketplace.
Okay.
So there's a bit of an uptick, but probably we should talk about this in more detail when we finalize the
we'll
survey.
dedicate some time for that for sure. Awesome. Thank you so much, Baris.
Of course.
That was a great update for everyone. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you to those of you who have tuned in to today's episode. If you're interested in these types of insights, we'll be hosting a webinar where Baris will go more in depth on the topics he's touched on today and provide you the opportunity to ask questions during the live session. Additionally, be sure to follow AutoTrader.ca on LinkedIn or our newsroom on go.trader.ca for even more data and insights. Thanks again, and we hope to have you join us at the next one.